Alrighty, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be talking about the LII. So that's base introverted logic and creative extrovert intuition. Okay, so let's just jump into it. So the first thing we're going to see is four-dimensional base or worldview function, introverted logic. So what does that mean? Well, it means that this type is going to be um, focused on logical consistency. That is a big part of um, their way of thinking. They are going to do this pretty naturally. It's going to be like second nature to them. I would even say that to move beyond just focusing on consistency, I would say, you know, introverted logic is about the the underlying, and especially with LII, the underlying rules that govern the world, right? So whether this be, rules regarding people, whether this be rules regarding the environment, whether this be rules regarding, an abstract concept, it's mostly going to be regarding the abstract concept or the like functionings of the world on a more metaphysical level. And that kind of brings me to the demonstrative function. This type is it's a very intuitive type. Demonstrative NI, creative NE. There is a lot of intuition flowing here. And the focus is on extrovert intuition. And so there's a real focus on um, potential. There's a real focus um, on exploring an idea. But what I notice is that this type is often pretty directed. There is that influence of the demonstrative function where it's almost like things have to be going a certain direction or they're not going to want to entertain it. And so that kind of brings an interesting element to it, but at the forefront of this type is going to be their values on extrovert intuition. So values on exploration, values on the potentiality of an idea. Um, but what you must keep in mind is that their whole place of operating or their general mode of operating is coming from structure. And so there's a significant difference here when you compare that to ILE, right? Where the ILE is, well, they're exploring ideas for their own sake, but they're not going to be more concerned with the general consistency between ideas, for instance. Their focus is on this idea, and then they'll logically structure things pertaining to that idea. Whereas for the LII, it's more so about, well, how do these ideas fit into this internally consistent logical structure, right? And so that's a big difference between these two types right off the get-go, right? They may be similar in a lot of ways, however, big difference. Most of the measurement that's happening from an LII's point of view is on whether these ideas or these differing perspectives, how they kind of all fit into a bigger picture. Um, and so that and understanding and that logical consistency. Um, so that's a big part of the LII and the difference with ILE. Um, but they're going to be a lot more directed, and that kind of takes us to, if we compare the ILE who has any base and NI ignoring, right? They're not really concerned with where things are going or what the track something is on because they're more concerned with the exploration of these ideas. And I do want to make a disclaimer that it's not that like an ILE has no regard for this or that they're incapable. Obviously, the ignoring function is capable. It's a three-dimensional function. And so they will be able to exercise it. And if an individual decides to focus on it more, then it'll be a little bit more evident. But you're still going to see that focus on um, exploration as intrinsic to the type. It's unavoidable. You might have a very open-minded, explorative, idea-filled IEI, but at the end of the day, everything they do is through the lens of introverted intuition. And so you're going to see a clear abandonment of NI for the ILE. And, to compare that to the LII, um, well, what we're seeing is the LII is a lot more directed. They want to see how like where these ideas are going, right? Where are we going with this? How does this kind of tie into things? And not only that, but they have a pretty strong awareness of where things are going. This can lead to this type being pretty stubborn, I would say, um, in some ways. It's I do have a little bit of difficulty understanding how these types prefer to operate in regard to their demonstrative function. Um, but what I've noticed is that they do pay attention to where things are going, and I would say um, they're also well. It's tough. It's a balance between them being exploring an idea and being very stubborn about where it's going. Um, you know, that's kind of hard to yeah, that's the main thing. And another thing I will say, this is a pretty critical one, I would say. Um, Oftentimes what confuses me about this type, I think, is that for myself as an IEI with base introvert intuition, I am often very communicative about where I'm going and what I'm trying to do. And what I find with LIIs is that they are not very communicative about that. They are more focused on fleshing out the idea. They're more focused on, furthering their understanding. But when I try to kind of, hey, like, where are you going with this? What's the direction that you're headed? It's almost like they're not headed somewhere. Um, which I don't think it's that they're not. I think they are headed somewhere specific. I think it's just that it's more important to me to know that than it is for them, right? So for myself, when I'm doing a given thing, I'm exploring an idea, whatever the case. I kind of have a direction I'm trying to go. This is what the goal is. This is where I want to take this idea. This is the path of development. I noticed that with LIIs, they have something like that in mind, but they're not super vocal about it. And so when I try to get information about that, it's kind of hard for me to receive it. So I feel like this is really diving into intertype relations as well. Um, this is an intertype relations observation. I'm not really sure how many types would be aware of something like that. I think that this is particularly something that an IEI would notice, maybe. Um, okay, so moving on. So now we have mobilizing SI, right? So this type is ultimately they're a very heady type. They're trying to ground themselves a little bit. And I would say that for the LII, it's a very holistic type of grounding. They really want to have a sense of harmony and balance in their life. And um, I'd say in some ways they're reaching for experience, but they're mostly reaching for that state of equilibrium, right? Where they can sort of build some kind of base or some kind of center from which they can get comfortable uh, and sort of find a place of peace in their lives. And this is something that I would say is something they'd be quite good at. Um, they're not going to do it in quite the same way that an SEI will, but obviously at the end of the day, this type's going to be a lot. I don't think they'd want to do it the way an SEI does it. I think that, you know, they're a really interesting type because they're so involved at the abstract, but they are focusing in on, sort of finding a grounding around them and I don't know, I think that's pretty interesting. They don't have they're kind of a little they kind of got like one foot in both worlds. Um I feel like obviously this type has SE polar, so their ability to put pressure on things and push back and deal with pressure in general is going to be not very good. Um, I do think that they're going to be a lot better with this in regards to, mm, I don't know. I think I've seen some cases where they can be seemingly pushy, but I don't really think that that's a fair or accurate description. So I think some of that is just how cold they can be. I think that would hearing that would probably upset some LIIs, or maybe they would think, well, this is not me, because I don't really think that LIIs like to think of themselves as cold. I think that they like to think of themselves as warm. But I think they know that they don't have a great skill at being warm. But I would say this type is soft. And this is, a commonality with IEI, for instance. The difference being that IEI is going to be doing everything they can to not be that. But the LII is looking for that sense of peace and harmony. And so they're not really going to be striving to, push back and create a lot of pressure. Um, I think that for them, they're looking for that sense of peace or that sense of comfort, I suppose you could say. Um, and I think part of this is also going to be, creating systems for how they operate in the world around them and how they sort of create their routines, I suppose you could say. I think that'll be a part of the LII's focus, a significant part. Um, and coming down to the suggestive function, this type is going to want to be they want someone to create that warm atmosphere for them. And I think another thing is you know, for like a TI base type, this is someone who, in a lot of ways is so logical and so detached that they want someone to make them feel something. And I think that this is something that, you could say LIIs and IEIs have a little bit of a parallel in, but in a different way, right? Because the IEIs are not necessarily focused on feeling something, but they are SE seeking. So they want that intensity, right? But with an LII, it's about excitement. It's about, feeling and getting excited about things and, living in the moment and having those, I guess you could say spontaneous experiences and feelings. And that's something that I think the LII is going to yearn for, especially because of how just sort of generally flat or, um, non-expressive and, they're not very like excitable, they have polar SE. Um, so I think someone who can really like land an emotional impact is going to be, something that they like, but in a sort of positive way, right? SLEs can have that sort of grotesque effect, whereas I think ESEs are just they have that raw, intense sort of way of being that's really that makes you feel comfortable. I mean, I feel really comfortable around ESCs, and yet they seem so dynamic and so intense in the way that they live their life and their sort of like lifestyle, but they're so friendly, it's crazy, right? And so I think that that is going to be a source of admiration for an LII who, you know, who's looking for someone who can shake things up and get them excited about things. Um, and ultimately, there's always going to be that interaction with the with like a TI base and a FE an FE base where the FE and the emotional expression actually feeds into the logical system that they're building. Because you have to remember that at the end of the day, emotional expression is something that is, FE is something that we all share, right? We all have emotions in common. So when you create that when you express how you feel, and you're able to get other people to feel this way as well, it's because it's something that's shared between us. And so as a result, TI is all about generality. TI is all about the law, the general principle between all of us, right? And so all of that emotion that's expressed is then used to create a logical principle or a way of operating that sort of accounts for these emotions. And so that's something you're going to see with the LIIs. They're looking for that expression, not only so that, they can feel that sense of excitement, but also so that they can build something with it that gives them what they need to sort of, understand people around them better, I would say. That as well as account for those people and what they may be feeling. So that's a big part of the LII. I mean, you got to remember with TI base being a very logical type, very detached type, social connection and social interaction is so important to them, right? Um, so moving on to role FI, I think that it's pretty interesting to see these types. They're a little bit better with FI. They're a little bit better with how they personally feel about things. Um, and I just find it interesting because, they have this they're so logical, but yet they have this room within them to feel a certain way towards things, and to be pretty clear on what that is. Um, it's not something you're going to see often. They'll probably use it because they feel forced or pressured to use it, in situations where um, people are trying to get an answer from them about how they feel about something. And LII may resort to like a logical explanation, and when that doesn't work, or when someone pushes back on that, um, I've noticed that it's usually a very brief declaration, summarized, and not very nuanced or detailed. It's almost like an admittance. That's what I've noticed. It's like LIIs, when confronted, they might give the logical answer first, but when you push again and you say, well, no, like if that were the case, you might have said this, or if that were the case, you might have done that. And if you press them, they'll sort of admit without giving you a lot. That's what I've noticed. It's like it's like they reduce it down to be a very simple admittance so that they don't open up any cans of worms they don't want to, right? It's like it's funny to me because the way that I perceive it is like they're like, how can I say this without giving much information out so that I don't create more problems for myself? Just enough to satisfy them to get them to stop bothering me with this question. That's what it feels like to me. And it might not be that. It might be that they just don't want to share it. I don't really know. But the way that I experience it, or maybe they don't know what they feel. That's what I was trying to say. Maybe they don't know what they feel about things, but it kind of seems like they just don't want to give away a lot of information because they don't want to get themselves into trouble, I suppose. So, so yeah, let's see. Uh, I think we've covered all the different functions. So if you have any thoughts, let me know down below. If you're an LII, come join my server. I like LIIs. We've got a lot of LIIs on the server who like to talk and discuss things about socionics. So if you found this interesting, go ahead, join us, and subscribe and give me a like. That always helps as well. If you don't know what your type is, you can always schedule a type diagnostic session in the description below as well. All right, thank you so much for watching. See you guys next time.